Welcome to the FangledCast, brought to you by Fangled Technologies, where we help you convert every person your company touches into a voracious advocate for your brand.
Welcome back to another edition of the FangledCast. Today, I've got Mark Bogomolny, who is a food expert. And rather than me screw up his credentials, let's do this. Hey, Mark, tell us who you are and what you do.
Again, Andrew, my name is Mark Bogomolny. I don't know if I'm a food expert, but I spent the last 25 plus years working in and around the food industry, whether it's, I spent, a number of years working in the retail grocery end, and then I spent the last 20 plus years as a consultant with people who are either trying to get into the grocery business or people who are trying to make the best spaghetti sauce in their basement, figure out how to get it on the shelf of a grocery store. So I kind of run the gamut from people who need help selling it, need help making it, need help buying it, and anything in between.
Yeah, and the reason I asked Mark on the show, and we've known each other for many years, is because so many people watch, for example, Shark Tank, and they see somebody with a food idea, and they think, "Oh, how easy! You've got this great food, everybody loves it. I'm going to make millions of dollars." And we kind of want to bust that myth today and talk about why the cards are really stacked against you, thinking that you can make a fortune in that retail food industry. So it's difficult even to know where to start. Except let's maybe look at some cases that you've known in the past of people who really thought they were going to make their millions and didn't.
Well, let me back up a little bit before we get into that and kind of paint the bigger picture in that there's about 40,000 items introduced into the grocery world a year. And if you think about,
Only 40,000.
well, it may be more than that, but that's a rough number. And a typical grocery store has about 40,000 items on their shelf. So for every item to make it into, every new item to make it into the store, every old item would have to be taken out. And we all expect that Heinz ketchup or Campbell's tomato soup or Hellman's mayonnaise always be on the shelf. So it's not practical for everything to get replaced, and every new item is not going to make it onto the shelf of a grocery store. So having said that, your odds are stacked against you right from the beginning.
Hmm. Well, one of the arguments, because I've shared that with people that have come to me with food items, is yeah, but with the internet now, I can get direct access to people and skip the supermarkets and get my product to market. What would you say to those folks?
Good luck. Um, but one of the interesting things about food is it tends to be heavy and it tends to be low cost, which are two things that aren't really good for shipping and absorbing transportation costs in small amounts.
Hmm.
Um, for example, years ago, I was in a business that wanted to do this. Actually predates the internet, but it has the same component as they were trying to do some direct marketing and using a catalogs for sales. And one of the items that they were selling was apple juice in a gallon jar. It weighed about 8 pounds and it cost about $2.89. Well, that 8 pound jar to send in UPS was about $12 at the time to go coast to coast. So you're spending 4 times the amount of money to send a $2 jar of apple juice across the country. And that's pretty typical of food because food has a relatively low cost and a relatively high weight. So the transportation through the internet is very low. The other thing that happens is the only way to make money in the food business is to have volume. And you really can't put your item in front of enough eyeballs on the internet unless you have some very special marketing and some very special backing behind you to get seen by a lot of people. And even then, you're still going to have this issue of how to get it from point A to point B and have it done at some reasonable amount of expense to either you or the customer.
It seems that the only food companies that are successful in that area of the e-commerce are when they're tied into a Walmart or an Amazon or something that already has that delivery matrix set up where they're warehousing and delivering and doing those sort of.
Or the other successful people are the ones that are selling an extraordinarily premium priced product, like the Omaha steaks or the the fruit basket people, the Harry and Davids of this world. But when you look at the prices that they're charging for the product that they're selling, it's way above and beyond what you would normally see at a supermarket, or what the average customer would expect to pay for a similar item. And that's the only way they can get away with it, is that the price has to be so extravagant that the costs of shipping then become in line to, so to speak, with the product price itself.
Yeah, I remember years ago when I was in the packaging industry, setting up distribution in Latin America, a company that manufactures bubble wrap wanted to know what the market was like in South America because they wanted to export bubble wrap. And we did the cost analysis per pound filling a container. And the cost to ship bubble wrap was almost 20 times the cost of bubble wrap. And by the time it would arrive. So the question then was, well, why don't you ship film and on the other end set up equipment so that you could actually inflate the bubble wrap and process it? But then it was, oh no, then our secret would get out how we make it. And it never came to be. So in the food industry, I mean, certainly when you start looking at those shipping costs, it's definitely cost prohibitive.
Yes. And that's why when you look at food, it comes down to volume. And the only way to make this work is volume through the whole system, whether you're shipping pallets and truckloads worth, or you're selling hundreds to thousands to millions of dollars a week through the store. It's the only way to make it work, because you're really talking a penny business.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not making that, for every can of soup or bottle of ketchup that you're selling, you're really not making that much per individual unit. The only way to make this work is to sell lots of units.
Yeah. When you go into the mind of, for example, the supermarket, the retailer, and you've got a new cookie, for example, your cookie has a different taste than all the other cookies. What would their incentive be to put you on the shelf to replace other cookies that they're already selling?
Well, first of all, that's a key point that most people miss when they say, "Oh, I got the next best cookie." The reality is that for every new cookie that comes in, the retailer has a finite shelf with cookies on it. They have to say, "All right, which cookies are no longer going to be on my shelf, so I can bring on a new flavor or a new brand or a new
Mm-hmm.
product." So that's the first question: is what goes? And if everything's making money, and if everything's profitable, and everything is turning the way it's supposed to be, you have an even harder chance of making it in. But to answer your question, though, the only thing that really will incent the retailer is, what are you doing as the manufacturer to make it leave my store shelf? It's up to the manufacturer to market the product. Most of my clients, when they first see, or they first think that they've got a sale, and there's some local grocery stores that I'll leave unnamed, that are in a sense a curse of my client base, because they like to entertain new local
Sure.
manufacturers, and these people come to me and say, "Well, it was just bought by retailer X, and I'm done."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "No, once retailer X buys your product, your job just started, because now you have to market. You have to get it off their shelf. You have to be the one to incent the customer to come in and buy it. You can't depend on the grocer with 40,000 other items to do that for you." So
What about the circulars they put out? How do you get in one of those?
money. Circulars, for the most part, are profit centers. Uh, you have to have your product get into circular by incenting the grocer by paying for the space. Typically, when you have a new item, there's a myriad of things that you can do. And this is once the grocer has decided to buy your item, whether it's and if you're a Costco shopper, you see it all the time with the sample people. Great way to create an incentive for your product. In the old days, it was coupons in the newspaper, which they still exist, or whether it's direct mail or direct to customer communication through social media, it's still your job and your responsibility to do that for the retailer.
So if I've got a new idea for a food product, if you had to describe without actually what that food is, what are the criteria of a food product that could be marketable in terms of value, in terms of interest? What if someone came to you with something that you would go, now that could do it? What kinds of words would you use to describe that product?
Well, the truth is that the product is less important than the marketing. And this surprised a lot of my clients, but I probably have only tasted maybe 30% of the products that I've helped clients with, because it really doesn't make a difference what's in the can, bottle, box, etc. What makes a difference to the retailer, and the underlying assumption is that there's nothing poisonous, harmful, or dangerous in the product. So let's just assume that those are off the table, and the product is of a decent quality. It's not up to me to say it's a great quality. My taste buds don't match yours, don't match somebody else's, but let's just assume for a minute that it's a decent quality. The thing that the retailer, or that I would want to see, is somebody says, oh, I know how to market this. I know how to make the next person want to eat it. I'm going to, in a sense, force the retailer to put on their shelf. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to the customers. I'm going to say, I'm going to put on TV. I'm going to put it in a newspaper. I'm going to send, have a social media blast, and people are going to say, oh, I want to see what this is. I want to try it. They're going to walk into their grocery store and say, do you have X product? And force the retailer to come back and say, I need it.
So you think that if you've got the ability to drive to where customers are asking the retailer, why don't you have this on the shelf? That helps?
Tremendous.
Tremendous.
Tremendous. See, one of the things that from the retailer's perspective, and I was a retail buyer for many years, is we don't want to take any risks.
Mm-hmm.
We make so little money per item as it is that we don't want to take a risk. And what's a risk? Well, a risk is giving up shelf space to something that doesn't sell.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of a big grocer, it's shelf space, it's warehouse space, it's redoing what's called the planogram, where it appears on the shelf, what goes in, what goes out. All of that is a cost. We don't want to take the risk on something that isn't going to sell. So when somebody comes to me as a buyer, they're going to say, the thing that's going to get my interest is not what's in the box, not what's in the can, although I will taste it, I will try it, I will make sure that it's acceptable, but it's what are they going to do to help me as a retailer reduce my risk.
Can you explain a little bit? I hear about it and I have a pretty good understanding, but I think the audience would want to understand this better. When you hear about you have to pay to get on the shelf, slotting fees and that type of situation that supermarkets have, can you explain how that works?
Well, it used to be people would think that a slotting allowance was a way to buy yourself in. And I'll say that the slotting allowance is another way that a retailer reduces his risk. And it goes back to what I was just talking about. If in fact a retailer has to make room for it in their warehouse, an item in their warehouse, if they have to make room for an item on a shelf, if they have to take something out of their system to put it in, if they have to create labels, if they have to create a new vendor in their accounting system, if they have to have it shipped to their shelf, all of these things have a cost.
Mm-hmm.
And the retailers don't want to absorb the cost. They can't absorb the cost in every single new product that they take on. So they've now called it a slotting allowance. And it's there in my mind, it's there to cover the costs that a retailer is going to absorb when they bring on a new item. And they're all over the place. A slotting allowance I've seen them as low as $2,000. I've seen them as high as $20,000. And it depends on what the product is. It depends on the area of the store that the product is in, the department. For example, paper towels have a high slotting allowance because they take up a huge amount of space for not a whole lot of cost. Frozen foods have high slotting allowances because it costs you more to have frozen foods. The frozen food warehouse is more expensive. The case is more expensive to run. So all of these things will run up the slotting allowance.
So
Are there cases?
to understand it though, the slotting allowance is something that you're selling a product to a supermarket or distributor, whatever it is that's selling it, and you're, in addition to receiving their money, you're giving some of it back to pay to be in that store in some way or another. Or is it just a discount that you give on your price?
Well, typically it's a cash payment.
Okay.
There there are, when you look at a new product introduction, there are probably 6 to 10 different promotional items that can be wrapped into your product to make a retailer more interested. They go beyond slotting allowance. And they include things like we talked about. Are you going to run coupons? Are you going to advertise in a television or radio station?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to pay the retailer? In a lot of cases, the retailers are the ones who actually own the demo company. So are you going to pay the retailer to have somebody stand there and demo your product? Are you going to pay me for the circular? And then on top of it, are you going to discount the product on an introductory offer? And then I may even say to the manufacturer, are you going to give me extended terms? Are you going to guarantee me a sale on this so I have no risk?
So a guaranteed sale, if we don't sell all the stuff we just put on your shelf, I got to buy it back.
Correct.
Yeah. When you go sometimes to the supermarket, there's a guy loading chips on the rack, and you walk up to that guy and go, "Hey, do you know where the so and so is?" And he goes, "Oh no, I don't work here." Who is that guy?
That's what's called a DSD, or direct store delivery driver. There are a handful of items in a grocery store. And when I'm talking grocery stores, I'm talking about chain stores. I'm not talking about an independent because they work a little different. I'm talking about a chain store that has its own warehouse, its own fleet of trucks, et cetera. But there's a handful of items that come in through the front door as a direct store delivery. It's the chip guys, it's the soda or the pop guys, depending on what part of the country you're from. In Ohio, it's the beer and wine guys because they have to come in through the store and they can't be warehoused. So these are items that usually have a relatively high turnover, and they don't come in through the warehouse.
So now that we've totally discouraged anyone from wanting to come up with a new food item, can we talk a little bit about what would encourage someone and how where their mindset should be in their product to possibly become successful in this business?
So the first thing is understand that whether it's Walmart or Kroger or whatever, the grocery industry still sells more of everything than anything else in the country as a whole. They sell more flowers, they sell more motor oil, they sell more baby food and diapers as a industry. So you can't ignore them if you want to be in that world. The key is understanding what you're up against and understand that it's a big money game to play in. This is not a $10,000 or $20,000, $100,000 market to play in. And it's unfortunate because there are a lot of good products that will never see the light of day because they can't compete with the guys who've got money. And when I talk to clients or prospective clients, the truth is that of those 40,000 items that you're up against, probably 85% of them are coming from the guys who already exist.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's Procter & Gamble with a new item, or it's Heinz, or whether it's a new cereal coming out from General Mills or Kellogg's, they already have a leg up. they know the game, they know the people, they already have the distribution set up. They have the ability to walk into a buyer's office and say, yeah, I'm making brown sugar coated Kellogg's cornflakes now. And you know what? Those toasted oats have never sold on your shelf before. I know the numbers. That's what I'm going to suggest to you as a buyer to swap out. Most people, when they're making spaghetti sauce in their basement, don't have the ability to walk into a buyer's office and have that knowledge or have that background.
Sure.
They also don't have the ability to understand that they need to price their items with enough marketing dollars in it that it makes sense for them to have profit and marketing dollars, and the rest of the price cost factored into that.
Sure.
I tell people all the time that a $6 box of cornflakes probably has $1 worth of ingredients in it.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk for a little bit before we wrap up about some of the alternative ways to go to market with a food item besides the supermarket chain. For example, you go out to Amish country and they've got the local country stores that have brands that you don't see in the supermarket. What are some of the other places that if somebody really wanted to get into it but couldn't afford at the beginning to go after those big behemoths where they want to sell, what are some other places where you can actually get started with a food product?
Well, they're always tough. I mean, whether it's the farmers markets, which there are plenty of,
Mm-hmm.
the independent grocers, which there are plenty of. The biggest issue comes back to that you're going to end up with a economic or an economy of scale issue
Sure.
that you aren't going to, if I've talked to enough people who say, well, I sell a couple $1,000s worth of stuff at farmers markets every month. Well, if you want a lifestyle business, if you want to support your family and put some food on your table, you may be able to go to enough farmers markets and sell $2,000 or $3,000 a month and pay your family or not pay your family and make it that way. But you're never going to scale up from that. In the same way, you're never going to scale up from the other, whether it's the Amish markets or the independents. There just isn't enough of them, and they're too scattered. So you don't get any benefit of some central advertising or some economies of scale where you're shipping one case on UPS here, one case there. The way to do it is put a truckload of stuff on and drop it off at a grocer's. And does it work? Are there people who've gone from, I put it on the shelf, I started it at the farmer's market and now I'm in the grocer's? Yes, it happens.
Sure.
And it's no different than somebody becoming Oprah's favorite thing.
Yeah.
But the rule of thumb says it doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, I always equate that to like the guys that you've got a kid that you really ought to go to college because they want to go into a career that typically requires a college degree, and they go, well, Zuckerberg didn't finish at Harvard and Bill Gates didn't, so I can be that. And it's, if you're going to live your life on the exception to the rule, you better be good.
And in my world, you have to be lucky. And whether it's Shark Tank or Dr. Oz or what used to be Oprah or Ellen, these people see tens of thousands of products. They do their own widowing out of what they want to accept, and even those that get on the air don't always make it. I mean,
yeah, and
Shark
you're
Tank
hitting on something that is one of the, if you're going to grasp for straws to get into this market, we talked about a little bit earlier, that social media influencer. The luck is that somebody who's got X number of million followers who happens to be consuming your product on their show or raving about it or otherwise, that's one of the ways that an obscure product might become highly demanded. But there was a movie, I was watching something on a streaming service, and there was a bag of chips, a brand of chips that I'd never heard of, and they kept bringing it up. And I was thinking to myself, I bet next week, now that this is the new show, everyone in America is going to be looking for those chips.
well, there's some truth to that, but I've also seen that work against somebody. I had a client many years ago who was fortunate enough to have their product tasted by one of the presidential candidates when they came through town, and it made all the national media. And she came to me and said, well, look, I've got this great exposure. Well, the truth was that 2 weeks later, the exposure disappeared and it didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And in the grocery world, there's a couple things that happen. One is obviously, if you're going to have exposure, you better have the ability to sell it when the exposure is there.
Yep.
And it doesn't work the other way around, because if the exposure is gone and the product is never there, you're going to have a hard time getting it there.
Makes a lot of sense.
And the second thing is that from a grocer standpoint, and this I've seen happen a lot also, is you're lucky enough to have a product that got on the shelf, and then all of a sudden, for some silly reason, it's the hottest item of the day, and you go in and it gets wiped out. It gets purchased like crazy. Well, the grocer's sitting there with an empty part of his shelf, which they can't stand. So they start moving things around to cover up, because you weren't ready for the sellout. You don't have enough inventory to fill the shelf up in time. So the grocer moves everything away. And then when they go to order that product again, it's not on the shelf. The shelf tag isn't there. The product isn't there. And the guy who's ordering doesn't know he's supposed to order it again, and you're dead.
Gotcha.
So it can be a good news, bad news thing.
So we're really talking about truly a treacherous industry to try to get into. That's fascinating. So tell me, I always ask this question at the end when I'm running out of time. Is there anything about getting into the food business that I should have asked you that I didn't, that maybe the audience would be interested in knowing?
Most important thing, again, isn't what you're trying to sell. It's to understand that it's an expensive, hard to break into industry, and don't let somebody convince you that just because people say, oh, you make the greatest pizza sauce or the greatest whatever, that it's going to be an easy road to hoe. It's very, very difficult. It's very expensive. And if you go in blindly, that you're really in trouble. And that's kind of where I fit in with a lot of my clients is I kind of give them the explanation of, this is what you need to understand, this is what you need to do. And if you just start knocking on doors, you may find that you get in and get the local guy to say yes, and realize that may have only been the worst thing that could happen to you.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been thinking, with all these plant-based meat products out there, or meat substitutes, I'm going to come out with a meat-based plant substitute. Can you bring that to market for me?
With enough money.
Beef celery,
With enough money.
Chicken tomatoes. No. Hey, I really appreciate you coming on and having this frank conversation. Sometimes, the purpose of the interview is to really bring some rational thought so that people can really weigh, is this something that I think I can do? And what are the real challenges? What are the stepping stones to get across the pond? I've multiple times been asked to get involved in food businesses. And every time I've passed, because, well, I know you and I know other people who failed. So how could somebody get in touch with you if they wanted to reach out? I'm going to be putting your email address in the credits and at the end.
Well, yeah, the easiest way is to read the name, because it's mark@mbogomolny.com, which it will be easier to read than it will be for me to spell. And I'd be happy to talk through these issues with people who are interested. I help people who aren't necessarily at the early stages. I help people in the middle stages of this, and I help people who are in more advanced stages of this. Even they're in, for example, the DIY industry or the home goods industry, and want to jump into the supermarket, where they do have some money and some background and some name recognition. And I will, it's the same problems exist, but at that point there's some goodwill and there's some name recognition, some branding that exists, in addition to hopefully some dollars. So I do see people from across the board. But I'll have a frank discussion with anybody who wants to get into this. And, I'm not afraid to tell somebody that it's a hard thing to do. And, sometimes it's better to keep your money in your own pocket.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on today. It was really a pleasure.
Anytime, Andrew.
All right.
Brought to you by Fangled Technologies, where we help you convert every person your company touches into a voracious advocate for your brand.